This story is called My Wife Cheated on Me for 6 years, Divorced Her and Cleaned Her Out. I guess you could call me your typical suburban guy. Got a great job at a tech firm downtown, a comfortable house in the burbs, a trusty Labrador who thinks he's still a puppy at 7. And until about 6 months ago, a wife who I thought was the love of my life. 23 years together, 20 of them in marital bliss. Well, that's what I thought. Anyway, Helen and I met in college. She was a political science major with dreams of reforming the education system, and I was a computer science nerd with my head in the cloud. Quite literally, we were the classic case of opposites, attracting each other. It was her passion and fire that drew me to her. And she claimed it was my calm and collected demeanor that made her feel safe. She had a wild side. Sure. But it was all a part of her charm. Our wedding was a small affair, just family and close friends at our favorite park the day she said I do. I thought I was the luckiest man in the world. Fast forward to 6 months ago. And the woman I thought I knew wasn't the one I was married to. At first. It was small things, more late nights at the office, less conversation at dinner. A general air of distraction. I chalked it up to maybe stress, the job. Her dream of reforming education turned into a hectic job as a school superintendent. But then the distance grew, we stopped having date nights. She was more interested in her phone than me. And our cozy nights turned into solo Netflix binges. You've probably heard this story before. A husband has suspicions. His wife is cheating, investigates and uncovers the truth. Well, that's precisely what happened, but at first I was in denial. Helen wouldn't do that. We were the dream team, but the signs were too glaring to ignore one evening. She forgot our anniversary of first in 20 years. And that's when I knew I needed to find out what was going on for my peace of mind, if nothing else. So I did what anyone in my shoes would do. I decided to play detective, discreetly went through her emails. I had access to, didn't find anything, and tried to go through her phone when she wasn't near it. But that didn't turn up anything. After all, the love of my life was drifting away, and I needed to know why, as much as it pained me to think of my Helen being unfaithful. The horrible feeling in my gut told me that her behavior was more than just work-related stress. It was a dreary Wednesday morning when I finally decided to hire a private investigator. Not my proudest moment, but I had to know if Helen was cheating. I deserved to know the truth. The process of hiring a private investigator was surprisingly simple. Even though it was a little uncomfortable, I called a reputable local firm and set up an initial meeting. The investigator, a former prosecutor, was kind and understanding. He assured me that my situation was far from unique, that he dealt with cases like this countless times before. I took a deep breath, told him my story and gave him the go-ahead. I gave the private investigator access to everything, phone records and even access to our cloud services. Over the next few weeks, I tried to keep life as normal as possible. I went to work, came home, took our dog for walks and tried to maintain an air of normalcy with Helen, but it was challenging knowing what was going on behind the scenes. I kept wondering if the private investigator had found anything yet, whether my worst fears would be confirmed or if I was making a mountain out of a molehill. In the meantime, I noticed Helen's behavior change. She was acting guilty, more on edge. I thought, is it because she suspected that I was on to her? I couldn't tell, and the uncertainty was eating me alive. After a few weeks, the private investigator called and said we need to talk. He invited me to his office the next day. I was not prepared for what was coming. He had some files on his desk, photos, phone records, videos, hotel receipts, all damning evidence. He started going over them one by one. Helen was indeed having an affair, but it wasn't a recent development. The investigator told me that she'd been seeing this man, a colleague from her office, for almost 6 years. My mind was spinning. 6 years. That was almost a third of our marriage. The man she was seeing was single, a few years younger than us, and seemed to share her passion for education reform. The evidence was all there, but I couldn't comprehend it. I remember asking the investigator if he was sure. He nodded. I'm sorry. He said, I know it's tough. I left his office in a daze. 6 years. The world outside seemed to move in slow motion. My mind was racing with questions. How did I not notice for so long? How did she manage to keep this hidden? Was our entire marriage a lie? As I drove home, the reality of the situation began to sink in. When I got home, Helen was already there. She was sitting in our living room, engrossed in her phone. I had to confront her then and there. But I held back. I needed to gather my thoughts and decide on my next steps. That night, I was devastated, but more than anything else I felt betrayed. I needed to confront Helen, but not without getting my ducks in a row. I decided to consult an attorney. After all, a divorce seemed inevitable now. But before that, I needed to protect myself and my assets. I had no idea how deep the rabbit hole went, and I wasn't going to leave anything to chance. The following days went by in a flash between work, meeting with my attorney, and keeping up appearances with Helen. I barely had a moment to process the magnitude of what was happening. My lawyer and I began talking about protecting my assets, or at least an attempt to. We started with my finances. I opened separate bank accounts and moved my savings into them. I changed the beneficiaries of my insurance policies to my sister as single mother of 2 lovely children. The next step was confronting Helen, and I was prepared for it. My lawyer advised me to keep my cool and not disclose that I knew about her affair. One day after dinner, I asked Helen to sit down. I looked at her and said, "Helen, I think we need to talk about our relationship." She seemed surprised. "What about it?" she asked. "I think we're drifting apart." I began carefully choosing my words. "It's like we're not connected anymore. You're always lost in your thoughts. Always somewhere else." Helen didn't say anything, just stared at me blankly. "I think we need a break." I continued some time apart to figure things out. I was watching her reaction closely. She seemed surprised but not shocked. After a moment of silence, Helen finally spoke. "I think you're right," she said. "Maybe we do need some time apart." The next days were a blur of packing and signing papers. Helen moved out to a nearby apartment. She left without much resistance, which surprised me. About a week later, my private investigator called again. He had been keeping an eye on Helen since she moved out and had some new information. Helen's affair wasn't limited to just one man. There were others, multiple others. It was one thing that my wife was seeing another man, but multiple men. It was a new level of betrayal. One I wasn't prepared for. I was beyond angry, but I managed to hold it back, armed with this additional evidence. I met with my lawyer. He agreed it was time to start the divorce process. We gathered all the evidence and submitted the paperwork. I decided to file for divorce on the grounds of infidelity when Helen came back to the house to get some of her things. I told her I was thinking about filing for a divorce. Bitch didn't show any emotions. Nothing. We started working on the division of assets. My lawyer gave me the name of a reputable property appraiser, and I arranged for him to come in and assess the value of our home. I was surprised to learn that we had much less equity in our house than I had imagined. Meanwhile, Helen and I lived our lives in parallel, barely interacting. We communicated mainly through our lawyers. She didn't contest to divorce, probably hoping to keep her affairs as private as possible. One afternoon, I got a call from Helen. She sounded distressed and said she needed to talk to me in person. My initial reaction was suspicion, but something in her voice made me agree to meet her. I decided to let my lawyer know, and he advised caution. Helen arrived looking like a shadow of the vibrant woman she once was. She started talking about regret, remorse, and the possibility of reconciliation. Her words seemed sincere, but I couldn't bring myself to trust her anymore. After all, she cheated on me for 6 years with multiple men. How do you forgive that? But I still heard her out, and then I told her the truth. I said I had lost my trust in her and that things could never go back to the way they were. She cried, apologized, and left. Weeks turned into months and the divorce proceedings continued. Helen and I by this time were strangers, communicating only through lawyers and court documents. At some point, I noticed that she stopped wearing her wedding ring. It signified the finality of our situation. Our marriage was truly over. Finally, the day of the divorce hearing arrived. The hearing was straightforward and the judge was fair. The evidence presented by my attorney made a strong case for my innocence and Helen's deceit. The judge granted the divorce, but Helen had to pay alimony for 10 years in the amount of $4,700 per month. Helen was also a trust fund baby and her father was very wealthy. He owned a whole lot of residential property and commercial property. I also got to keep the house and I also got 30% of her retirement. After the hearing, Helen approached me with tears in her eyes. She said she was sorry, that she never meant to hurt me. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, wished her well and walked away. It was over. Our 23-year marriage had legally and officially ended after the divorce. My life took on a new rhythm. The house was put up for sale and I moved into a small apartment, a bachelor pad as some of my friends jokingly referred to it. It felt good to have a fresh start. A blank canvas on which to rebuild my life. 6 months after the divorce, I decided to sell the house we lived in. It took about 4 additional months to sell. Wasn't much equity in it. Less than $20,000 with the money from the sale of the house. I decided to use it as a down payment for another home that I purchased. Some of my family members and friends asked me why I didn't get some type of revenge. I didn't want revenge for me. It was a waste of my time. I am getting $4,700 per month in alimony for 10 years, which equals $564,000. I am also getting 30% of her retirement. I am okay with that. She is paying me over $500,000 plus for not keeping her legs closed. I don't need revenge. I wasn't going to let revenge direct my energy into the wrong place. I think I will do just fine, but I will tell you one thing, I will not get into another long-term relationship anytime soon.